Welcome to Positive Filter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Filter. I'm joined by a special guest. I'm joined by Miss Lindsey Pollak. Now, I've connected with her and actually really engaged. I think we've been connected for a while on LinkedIn. She is a world-renowned author, best-selling, New York Times bestselling author, and she just knows everything about work and what's going on and jobs. I mean, she's on it. So with that being said, I think I'm so gracious that she joined me on the podcast today. And before we get into this episode, Lindsey, can you just give the listeners a little elevator pitch of who you are?
Yeah, thank you for that very nice introduction. We have been LinkedIn friends for a long time, so it's fun to connect on your podcast. My name is Lindsey Pollak. I've been doing this work for about 20 years. I started when I was laid off from my first job at a website and tried to figure out how to launch my career. And I wrote a book called Getting from College to Career, where I really asked and answered all the questions I had that drew the attention of LinkedIn. So for 6 years, from 2009 to 2015, I was an official ambassador for LinkedIn, going around to primarily college campuses and doing a lot of webinars and speaking. And really loved the campus world. I was an RA on campus, so I really relate to the career services and student affairs folks and feel like we're all of the same people. I was a tour guide too, which comes up a lot. And then I really transitioned a bit more into the corporate market because companies were really struggling to figure out how to attract and retain what they were then calling millennial talent. I wrote my next book, Becoming the Boss, about becoming a manager for the first time. And as I've evolved, and frankly gotten older, I've really gotten interested in generational differences. I'm a Gen X, so my third book was called The Remix, about managing across generations at work. And then during COVID, I obviously, like everybody else, was trying to figure out how to survive in really changing times. And I wrote my most recent book, Recalculating, about navigating through change. So I think kind of the through line has been writing and speaking about issues I myself was curious and struggling with, and really trying to answer all the questions I had and share those answers with people. So I love studying the workplace and career development. I love talking to people who are interested in it. And I'm always just looking for the next big thing that people are talking about.
I love it. So, just going back, I love the content creation. And so did you have a background, like you said, writing and speaking? Was that something that you did in undergrad? And just something, when I say even did in undergrad as a passion, was that something you were always doing growing up as a child, was writing and just getting out there and, speaking, plays or whatever,
Yeah, it's so funny. I always recommend that people look back to childhood. And I remember really specifically, I have a 10-year-old daughter, so I've been kind of watching her go through these phases. When I was in third grade, you had to write what you want to be when you grow up. And I said writer. And then later on, what's funny is people sort of take that and interpret it. So I said, I love to write. I love to talk. I always got yelled at for talking. And people said, oh, you'll be a great lawyer, right? And what I realized was that wasn't what I wanted to write and talk about. I was really, really interested in career development. My mom started a business when I was a kid. So I think I kind of watched her go through that process. She used to listen to like small business owner tapes, in the station wagon, driving us around. And so my very first internship in college was with a nonprofit in Connecticut, where I'm from, that helped women start businesses. And then my first job out of college was with a magazine called Working Woman, who had launched a website. So I think that career development piece was kind of the missing link of taking the writing and the talking and doing it in an area that I was passionate about. I was an American Studies major. I wimped out on the English major. I didn't like all the poetry and Shakespeare. I wanted to do more modern stuff. But I definitely was someone who always was interested in more of the liberal arts writing, reading path, as opposed to the more science and math track.
I mean, I think, the listeners can't see me smiling, but I'm vibing so much because, I'm a history major. And I think, I never realized I was the same way where, pulling from a child that like I was always told I talked too much in class. Mm-hmm. And that's one of my favorite things to do via podcast. So I think that's great.
Here we are making a living talking too much.
Here we go. We're doing a bigger job. So like, let's take us through this process. I mean, I think I really want to focus this on the recalculating and what's going on in the world of work. Just, in the author studio, the mind of an author, like, when did you realize, like, during COVID or whatever was going on, like, this is something I need to start jotting down in a notebook and start the writing process, particularly for this topic?
Being an author is so interesting. I had always used that word writer, but the long form of writing is really different. And something that I can't explain is I really like long form writing. I like to really dig into something. I like to have folders and post-it notes and, kind of struggle with that format. I joke about it, but truly I'd rather write a 60,000 word book than a tweet. Like, I just really enjoy that form. And I think one of the things that I realized with giving speeches as well, and I know this relates to you, Phil, is I really like doing things that some people don't like to do. And a lot of people don't like giving speeches. And I was always the one who said, oh, I'll do it. I'll speak for the group. A lot of people don't want to do that. And a lot of people don't want to write long form. And something I haven't talked about a lot is while I was kind of job hunting and figuring out my career after Working Woman went out of business in 2001, is I did a lot of ghostwriting, which was writing other people's articles and books for them. And it was really a skill that came somewhat naturally to me that a lot of people didn't want to do. And so my aunt was a literary agent, so I had a little bit of an in there. And she said, I can get you work doing long form writing for people. And I really love the process of books. And so I don't write books all the time. I mean, it's been every, 5 years or so until this recent book. But with COVID, I was writing on LinkedIn really short form stuff. And it wasn't until my literary agent said, there's a book in this, there's enough content. And when she said that, it kind of triggered my thought process to say there really is. And what's funny is when I started writing in spring of 2020, the pitch was that it would be the post-COVID recovery book. And obviously we all know now, when the book came out in March 2021, more than a year ago now, it was still very much COVID. So we had to kind of adapt along the way. And I really enjoyed that process of making the book something that would kind of outlast that particular situation.
So for those that are new, I love the journeys of authors and whatnot, and especially long form. So, like you said, you get inspiration, you're putting on Post-it notes, and then like you just, you're thinking, when is it when you take it? I'm very curious. When do you take it from ideas and, that crazy thought map into let's hone it in? How does that work?
So with a book, and some people have one book in them, right? They want to write their one manifesto. And I think that's great. And I kind of have that vision. I have made a career of this, so I have to do that more often, every 5 years or so. And what I'll say is your book has to be a saleable idea that people will buy. And so I have written many proposals that didn't work out. I wrote one about how to get your second job, and the editors were like, yeah, no, that doesn't resonate at all, not interested. Or maybe you're writing about a topic that too many people have written about. So, something I've really tried to embrace is the kind of throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, which is don't be afraid to write a one-page treatment that says, hey, I'm having this idea. Should I go further? Should I not? And then, what is it that actually clicks? And that's kind of what happened with Recalculating. As I said, I'm getting this feeling that there's more here than just an article. My literary agent suggested I wrote a one-page proposal about the idea of recalculating, and they liked it. And I was able to turn that into a book. But not every idea that I've had has successfully turned into a book. So it's got to be a combination of what interests you as an author that you think you can write 60 to 80,000 words on, but then what also is a marketable topic that people want. And I think some people miss out on that. But you can see here, I'll turn my camera. I don't know if you can see on the floor. How do I angle it? But I have, papers everywhere of all the stuff. There you go. That I'm writing about and thinking about and doing. And, you see the first draft of my books in my LinkedIn posts. That's where I test stuff. I see what people want to talk about. I test it in my speeches. And, it's a very long process to having ideas bubbling in your head to actually turning it into a book.
I love that. I definitely, as someone that loves content, and you told me like speaking, I think that is a tremendous skill. And it's something like I've always been so like, it's awesome. I love now meeting authors because now I see that the journey is so remarkable. And so I didn't know that. That's something new. I didn't know about you write one page and just test it, because from my assumption is that you want to put a lot of work and then like already have like 10, 20 pages in. And it's like, no. So you test it first before you go it. So I love this process as you're going through it and incorporating it. Take us through your process of incorporating not only data, what's going on in the world of work, but also what they call it, qualitative, like interviews and stuff, and asking subject matter experts. Take us through both. How did you kind of read what's going on and also just speak to people to get knowledge?
It's a really great question that a book has to have quantitative analysis, which is the data and the truth and the facts, with qualitative, which is the interviews and my opinion and my experiences. And I think it is a mix. I don't do my own quantitative research. Some people do. I have not gone down that path. I trust sources like Pew Research Center or Gallup or Harris Polling, et cetera. But once I have an idea, the first step in a nonfiction book is you have to write a proposal, which is very similar to a business plan. Who's the market? What is the competition? What is your basic outline of chapters? Who are you going to interview, et cetera. So you write a plan. And I am a planner. And so I have a very, very, very clear, strict outline for myself. A lot of writers don't. They sit down with a blank piece of paper. I personally really like to outline because I will have a folder for every chapter. And then what I do is just dive in. And I don't know if you're familiar with Clifton's strengths, but my number one is input. I love to just get all the stuff. And I have stacks and stacks and stacks of paper. I recycle, I donate to environmental causes. I'm sorry for all the paper, but I like to print and, I have my highlighter. And what I do is just circle stuff, highlight, make notes, and then I throw it into the folder that I think it fits with. So those folders usually become my chapters. So for instance, with Recalculating, I had a chapter on mindset. I had a chapter on job hunting. I had a chapter on recalculating within a company. I had a chapter on networking. And I would read something and just kind of circle it. With the interviewing process, I really start with people I know, which is, oh my gosh, I know Phil does CrossFit and he might have an idea about, how fitness plays into the process. And then when I speak to you, my last question to every interviewee is always, Phil, who else do you think might want to talk to me on this topic? Now, of course, I go for some famous people or, people are in the news. The other piece of my little folder research is I see people quoted in the news and I'll reach out and say, would you talk to me? But it's really a combination of who I know, who they know, and then who's kind of speaking up on a topic. And that part is really fun and it's really organic. And, I always finish a book and say, oh, I should have talked to that one more person. But I really trust that if I always ask people for the next right person, that they arise. But that's sort of the most enjoyable part of the process to me.
I love it. I am very familiar with the Clifton strengths, and you'll not be surprised that my number one is woo. So
I saw that on your. I like that you put it on your LinkedIn profile.
That's so I definitely find that interesting. I love it. And so as you're going through the data, particularly for this recalculating, when did you know, like in this process, you're striking gold? It's very timely. I believe you're catching the wave. Like, it's like I wrote something that's very timely to this moment. When did it start in that process? Because I know that you did the one pager, but then maybe further on, you're like, I struck gold or whatnot. When did that come to you?
I have two moments that absolutely just popped into my mind. The first is the title. I have traditionally been terrible at titling my books. I mean, getting from college to career, it's a very clear title, but it's not exactly creative, right? And it was always like the last thing I did. This book really started with the title. When I wrote the proposal, the one pager, I was like, I think I had called it like turning around or, level. I had nothing interesting. And I was sitting in my apartment in New York and I had always worked from an office, but it was shut because of COVID. So I was sitting at this little desk I had set up looking out the window. And what I liked about that experience was I had not had a window in my previous office. So here I'm sitting looking on the street in New York City. And I see cars and I had this moment of literally thinking of the moment when you're driving and you make a wrong turn or you hit traffic and your GPS says recalculating. And it was like literally a light bulb moment, which I have never had with a book title saying that's it. That is exactly what this feels like. I immediately called my agent. We immediately called the editor and all of us kind of had that reaction. So that moment was great. The second moment that really stands out from a qualitative research perspective is I really remember interviewing people who had been laid off and people who had not been working for a long time. There was so much fear that being out of the workforce because of COVID was going to hurt people. And I remember sort of back to back, it might not have happened that way, but in my memory it did. I interviewed two people who had the same situation. Both had been laid off or hadn't been working and had to get back into the job market during COVID. And they had to work. And one of the people said, I got laid off from my job. I haven't been working for months. I'm never going to get a job. It's COVID. Times are tough. And this person was really down and really concerned. Then I spoke to someone in the exact same situation who said, I've been out of work for a while. I got laid off from my job. It's this crazy time. I think there's so much opportunity. I think I'm so unique. I can't wait to get back. And I was like, whoa, this is not about the facts of your situation. This is about your attitude and how you take action based on your situation. And the contrast of those two people and how they approached recalculating said to me, there's something to this idea that it's not your situation, it's how you handle your situation. And that really informed a lot of the book.
Wow. I mean, I feel like that's one was coming from a deficit model and the other person was coming from an abundance model, and just your mindset shift. Now, it doesn't, in both scenarios, it doesn't diminish the trauma that COVID have, but it almost still builds that agency that we all think about, like, what can you do within your control, particularly in chaos. So let's talk about your chaos, going on, like trying to write a book and, COVID and trying to, be at home. Talk about that. Like, how was that? Like taking care of yourself and, putting on your own oxygen mask during this process of writing a book.
I love that metaphor. I use that a lot too. It was really, really hard. And I've been really vocal about how hard it was, because I think there's sort of a sense, and I had thought, well, I'm pretty successful, like I'll be fine. And the truth was, I lost 100% of my business in March of 2020. Every single speech that I had planned, that I had been prepaid for, all of that was gone in an instant. And I had no experience of that. And what I realized was a couple of things. I had all my eggs in the speaking basket, or the vast majority of my eggs in the speaking basket. And that had to change. I had to diversify my business to more online learning. I get book royalties, but that's not enough to live on, to speaking, to coaching. So I realized I had put way too much of my business into speaking. And I had to pivot really, really quickly to writing the new book, to doing virtual speeches, to doing some coaching. And I realized I never wanted to be in that scenario again. So I had to diversify. The second thing was, it tested a lot of assumptions that I had made that I think were right. And the first one of those was that relationships are everything. During those first 2 weeks of COVID, people were clawing back deposits. It was not only that I was not making new business, I was losing business I thought I had established. And I started to get on the phone and I called people and said, hey, I need some business, right? Here's what happened. Here's where we are. Could I do a webinar on returning to the, on working virtually? Could I do a webinar on this? Could I do a webinar on that? And I dialed for dollars, and it was really, really, really hard. And I had to kind of swallow my ego. But those deep relationships, people said, you know what? I know you, I trust you. I know you can put something together really quickly. And they gave me work during a really, really hard time. I had a very good relationship with my bank. And they helped me get the first round of the PPP loan for small business owners. So it really confirmed for me that this is a marathon, not a sprint, that your relationships are everything. And I'm not an overnight success. I've been doing this a very long time. And while that sometimes feels like, oh my gosh, other people succeeded so much faster, that the benefit of that is that I had really long-term relationships. And on a mental health perspective, I'm someone who has struggled with anxiety my whole life. I went untreated during college in my 20s, and it was panic attacks and ruminating and perfectionism. And I started to see therapists and go on medication in my 30s. I started to get very vocal about my own mental health concerns and anxiety, because I saw in so many people. And I started to talk about it in my webinars. I started to talk about it in podcasts, on LinkedIn. And I can't tell you, you talk about those moments you asked about. There were so many times on a webinar when I would sort of subtly, I didn't want to be, over the top, I'm not a therapist, but say, if you're struggling, if you're burning out, if you have anxiety, isolation, please seek help. I seek help. I take medication. And because it was virtual, the chat would blow up with private messages to me.
Yes.
And that was this moment of like, oh my gosh, why have I not been talking about this for 20 years? If anyone had said this to me when I was in college or starting out, maybe I would have sought help sooner. So I've really gotten much more vocal about my own experience, and that sometimes I have bad days and sometimes I fall into those patterns, but I have support and you need it too. So I've become much more vocal as a result of COVID.
I love that. Thank you so much for that vulnerability, because I think, what I've learned during COVID is that COVID has exacerbated the things. There was no really delineation. And so you were able to bring people were bringing that personality in home, the things that were below the surface that we struggled with at a certain point, like you couldn't even hide it no more. Like, the exacerbation of anxiety and all that, and which is one of the top things going on in higher ed as well with our students. So thank you. And then you realize, I think with that, there's a a fine line between sharing to heal yourself or sharing to help. And I realized that during this, wow, vulnerability saves a lot of people's lives. So I'm pretty sure in those chats where people felt lonely, they were very able to connect. So that's very powerful. I mean, I've seen that a lot with the image of Black men and mental health, where during COVID, a lot of those walls broke down a little bit. And a lot of people that you did not know had these things going on are a lot more vulnerable and vocal about it. So thank you. So I'm thinking about this, right? Like you're doing it, you're learning. I love that when you're creating this stuff. How much did that start to also, when I say heal, but fill you up? Diving into a project, as you said earlier, I lost my speaking gig, so this was an area to channel some of that energy and stuff. So talk about that, where you were channeling this during that time.
I'm a workaholic. Part of the anxiety is the workaholism and the perfectionism. And it was really hard not to be busy. I think that's something I struggled with a lot. Some people embraced it and absolutely loved it. I hated it. I live in New York City, and we relocated for a variety of reasons to a very rural town in Connecticut. And I'll be honest, it was very hard for me to not have that stimulation, not have the social life. And we thought about, maybe we'll change our lives and, live on a farm. And it was like, nope, I know myself. I need that. And so I really started to remember that the most important thing for me is connecting with people. So I started to do walk and talks. I wasn't in the city, I wasn't face to face, but I could still incorporate that. I tried to do a lot more social stuff on Zoom, but I really struggled with that lack of connection to people. And the book was a way to do that. And I think, the book only took me about 4 months to write. I did it very quickly. But because I was so excited about being engaged in something, it made me realize I needed to do more projects with other people. I did more volunteer work. I joined a committee for NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. I really doubled down on community. And I think it was a big lesson for me that isolation is really damaging for me, even if it's isolation of just not having enough to do. I had to get more involved in stuff. And I think, as you said, the pandemic taught us a lot about what we need. And I think that I sort of let myself get isolated because we didn't know. And now I feel like I know that if I'm struggling, if I'm in a bad mood, it means I'm not busy enough and I'm not connecting enough with other people. I need my alone time too, but those were really big lessons. Did you have other lessons like that? I'm curious about your experience.
I'm glad you asked me. I mean, because I'm like, I know we have met not, and we're gonna meet someday in face to face, but we're soulmates. Like, in a sense that like that was for me, social connection is number one. I relationship matters. So I literally overtly used that. Like I was making virtual movie nights, and doing Netflix watch parties, or like I was trying to find any loophole to see people, but safely. Like I will drive to your house, but I won't come in. I'll stay outside with my, I was doing anything. So the walking thing, like I've started doing walks on campus here at Mason and connecting, and I do like weekly walks, which have been very filling. So I was just vibing with you. Like it was like I had to find the line and balance of doing it safely, due to what's going on with COVID. But like I knew that like I was slowly, that's saying killing myself. That's dramatic, but I was slowly exacerbating my stress without incorporating the importance of relationships. And that is number one to me too. Like just my people, my best friends, being very overtly conscious of building that connection virtually. I was like, I'll make it work, figure it out. And so that was kind of important for me. So I'm smiling because I definitely get that. So I'm thinking about this, right? We're recalculating. I think our GPS, I love your thing. I feel like our GPS, we're still not to our destination. Maybe we won't even get to our destination, but because, everyone said the new normal, there is no normal. So what are some of the things that you're learning as we're going forward in this world of work that like we're still slugging through? Like, what are some things that you're like, these are things that organizations need to think about, and we're still developing it. It's not finite yet. We're not there, but what are some things, some themes in regards to that landscape of work?
You nailed it in your question. It's not finite and we're not there yet. I think one of the things I learned in writing the book, one of the things I learned through COVID, and one of the things I think I've learned in my whole career is I think I used to think we had one destination, right? And what you find is you have a series of destinations and they change, and that's okay. And the destination, my destination is to write a book. now I have 4 and I want more, so, it changes. Or you start your own business or you get a job or, I'm now thinking about, what's my next big thing. So it's okay to not have one goal. And I hear this a lot with students, and I bet you do too. Like, I don't know what I want to do. It's like, you don't have to know what you want to do forever. What do you want to do for the next 5 years? What do you want to do for the next 2 years? And so it's this idea that I really admire people who are always adjusting their destination based on their life. And by the way, I'm a mom now, my destination changed when I had a child, right? So depending on where you are and what you're doing, and this is, I think, the message to companies and employers as well. Everybody's obsessed with this return to office policy. All anybody wants to talk to me about is what should their policy be? And my answer is you can't have a policy for the rest of, creation. What's your policy for the next 6 months? What's your policy for the next 12 months? It's okay to think about that and recalculate. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to have the answer. And I'm really realizing that trying a lot of stuff, and I'm going to do this in my shout out later of who's kind of taught me that, but try a lot of different things and don't feel pressure at any point to know what you want to do forever, because it's going to change. And if I said my entire goal in life is to write a book, I would have been shortchanging myself because I wanted to do a lot more. And after that, I discovered. So I think that's a really, really important message, that your destination is not one and done. It's going to evolve and change all the time. And that's a good thing. And everybody's doing it. And if you're not sure, try 10 different destinations and see what it is that you want.
Well, one, it hits 2 points. One, it hits that design thinking model of your life, right? Mm-hmm. Prototype, see what works, prototype again, see what works. And I used to always joke when I met with students. I used to teach introduction, change your major class. Mm-hmm. And I used to look at them and say, day one, I'm not going to be able to tell you what you're going to do for the rest of your life. I'm sorry. And they would look at me with shock, like, you're supposed to teach me. I said, though, my goal is to help you prepare for your next step. And life is a matter of next. It's next, next, and next. And the only thing that you can do is make sure you make the most informed and best decision that's not perfect, and then figure out and make another. Like, your life is just a bunch of decision trees until, whatever it is, which for me, I love that. I'm going to assume that you are a J on the Myers-Briggs.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I am a fake P. And what I mean by fake P is that, like,
I hate that. I wish I could have put in one. The reason I'm in J is I wish I could have one destination and be one and done, but life doesn't work that way.
No, I'm a fake P, as in a sense that I was like, I'm a military brat. My dad was very orderly, but there was a lot of flexibility. So I know about making my bed and doing all this stuff that's regimented. But then also my life was chaos, like having Christmas on the road or like figure it out, like we figured it out. And so I don't know, I joke with a lot of people about, what's it called? Like Bane, where it's like you were born in, you embraced the darkness. I was born in it. I was actually, sometimes during COVID, I was thriving because I kind of like this, like figure it out and like work with my sweatpants on. And like, I was, I love chaos. I was working on my neighbors, like watching my kids play and just connected to the Wi-Fi at people's houses. And they were like, that's right. But that was it. That was, difference. I love flexibility. So I don't know. I try to incorporate that with students, that it's a matter of nexus. And so I think that you learn that. So what are organizations need to do to evaluate this? Like, do you think that they need to go to like this more model? Like, I think normally in businesses, we got Q1 and Q2 in business and then all that. Do you think it needs to be like more, is it agile? Is that what they call it? Agile, where like they need to increase that and be like, okay, instead of Q1, let's reevaluate Q12, like be more thoughtful. What are your thoughts on that, about more routine check-ins?
It's such a great question. And I understand the pressure, because I think that there are two competing thoughts that I do think you can figure out. One is people need clarity. I just read a study that said employees who've been asked to come back to the office full-time 5 days a week are actually happier than employees whose companies haven't set a policy, because the uncertainty is a killer. And so this sort of like 3 days a week at your own discretion, I think is more complicated than Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? Or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So number one, when you can, be clear, because not setting boundaries hurts, I think, more than it helps. That said, I think you can set a policy that is not long-term. So for the next 6 months, we're going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then we're going to reevaluate. Or for the next 12 months, we're going to be this and reevaluate. Or, we're going to figure this out, but I can tell you for sure, for 6 months, this is going to be the case, right? And we all know there might be, additional quarantines and so on and so forth. But I think it has to be a combination of short-term planning with clarity. But this sort of like, we're not sure, do whatever you want, I don't think ever makes sense. So whether it's 6 months, whether you call it a pilot, I'm a big fan of calling things a pilot. I did a podcast. I piloted it. I did 12 episodes. I didn't love it. I prefer being a guest, but I piloted it. I tried it. And I called it a pilot to kind of give myself an out. So pilot with clarity, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And I understand, maybe a college needs to do it by semester because that makes sense for your world. Maybe a corporation, it has to be, like you said, Q1, Q2. But this idea that we're going to know now what the world is going to look like in 6 to 12 months. I mean, have we not learned our lesson that we don't know, but within a reasonable amount of time, which I think is usually about 6 months, we have to give people some clarity.
Now, can there be clarity in like uncertainty, like in a sense, like we don't know exactly the answers, but at least we're being transparent and telling you we don't know the answers?
Yeah, I think you have to say, here's what we do know, right? We don't know yet what's going to happen with COVID, but what we do know is right now, we think that people do better when they're in the office at the same time. So we are going to set, I'm making this up, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday as in-office days. Here's the thing. Number one, if COVID comes up again, we will reassess. And number two, we will give you at least 3 months notice because we know that people have apartments and, school and so on. So here's what we do know. Here's what we don't know and is set, because there are always things, even during COVID, even in the worst of the lockdowns, there are things we knew. We know we have enough runway for the next 6 months. Nobody's getting laid off. That I can tell you. What I can't tell you is what's going to happen after that, right? So radical candor with the certainty that you do have. Does that make sense? You always know something.
100%. Like share what you do know. Also, how about the share what you do know, and what about the importance of soliciting feedback from those that work for you? Because I think a lot in this dialogue too, I think has been really helpful is that leadership says, I don't know this, this, and this. And then they kind of like get a pulse of what their people need, which are not the same. Like a large organization and their needs is different than that. Have you found some dialogue about, I think, more soliciting, and rather than talking down, soliciting the input and feedback from bottom up?
Yes, I've seen a lot more employee surveying, both the quantitative, again, of actual surveys and the qualitative of, hey, what's on your mind? What's the buzz? I was talking to a law firm partner who said he always talks to the junior associate, says, what's the buzz, right? What am I not hearing? Because I think what that does and why it's so important is first you have to be transparent about why you're asking for it. You need to say, look, this does not mean that you are deciding the fate of this business. I'm the leader. That's my job. But I want your input and I will incorporate it and, commit to reporting back to you. But the second thing is I think we make assumptions. And I think you and I have both sort of been honest that, to me, frankly, I don't want to work from home every day. And so I would feel more honest, on a survey saying, I would like to be in the office sometimes. So I think leaders make assumptions that Gen Zs don't want to come to the office because they love technology, or baby boomers all love to come to the office. Or I'll tell you a common one, this as a parent. As a working parent, people say, oh, you must want to be home with your kids. And I'm like, nope, not all the time. My sister-in-law has 2 really rambunctious boys, and her company said, you can come to the office 2 days a week. And she said, is that a minimum or a maximum? Because I would really like to come more. So we make these assumptions without actually testing them. And so I think what surveys and qualitative research do is they check your assumptions and say, we're never going to sort of make everybody happy. There's no one size fits all ever. Ever, ever, ever. There are people who would love to be in the office 5 days, people who don't, and everything in between. It's not black and white, but you've got to sort of get a temperature check of what's going on. And you also have to be honest and transparent that you're going to use that data, but it's not going to inform every decision. I think we need to be clear about that.
I love it. Now, just going off the top of the head and talking about these different things in unique situations, what plays into the world of work about the diverse identities of people and how that plays out? You spoke to generational differences. We could speak to racial differences, skill level differences. What, during your process of writing a book, were some of these things in regards to identity and the different ways it shows up for the future of work?
I'm so glad you brought this up. I hired someone who's called a sensitivity reader, who looks at my content and sort of tells me where my blind spots might be. And it came up a lot that I was making assumptions as a white woman, as a cisgender woman, as someone who was raised middle class, where, I'll give you one example. I was talking about Gen Xers coming of age as latchkey kids, right? Where for the first time their parents were both working, and they said, really? for a lot of immigrants and people of color, both parents have always worked. So don't pretend this was invented in the 1980s, because that's when it affected middle-class white people. And that was a big learning. I found that I would call women by their first names when I was quoting them, and call men, Mr. Wilkerson as opposed to Phil, which was, I couldn't believe that I was doing that. I had bias against able-bodied people, right? Or people who are not neurodiverse. So it really called me to think more about my own biases. And the second is, we make assumptions. We make assumptions that young people all want to be in the office. We make assumptions that people of color want to be part of programs that are segregated from other programs. Those are not right assumptions for everybody. And every Black man has a different opinion. We can't, say, well, if Phil says that, then every, young Black man might feel the same way. And so we have to constantly ask people what it is that they're looking for. And on the inclusivity piece, I'm really, really worried about who wants to stay home and who doesn't, who wants to be in the office and who doesn't. And I think this idea of hybrid equity is going to be a really important one moving forward. I don't know how you can be fully inclusive and fully equitable when not everybody is in the same physical place. And I'm learning how to do that, because it is a different mentality of who's in the room and who's not, and how to make sure that that's equitable. So while I think we still have a lot of work to do, I think the fact that the issue is in the room and has been in the room more than it was pre-COVID is hopefully a positive thing. My fear is that people get fatigued with the topic and say, oh, yeah, diversity, that was so 2020. I hear that a little bit. And I'm really concerned that we don't let that happen. But again, I'd love to hear from your perspective, because we have different, we come from different, identities.
I agree. I think, one of my main things too is that, this is the wave right now, like, diversity, equity, inclusion, so many resources, so many new staff. And that I'm with you. Like, I'm almost like, that's, riding the wave right now, but let's see if it, lasts, right? Like, are they still going to be putting all these money in racial task force and all this stuff after COVID and 5 years down the line? Is this a systemic thing, or was this just a performative thing? So that's something I'm just going to be, watch as a person. I was like, oh yeah, they speaking it right now, but they're going to walk. Are they still going to continue to keep the momentum, keep that energy? That was my slang. I was trying to think of, like, how much keep that same energy. Are you going to keep that same energy down the line when there wasn't a hyper focus on it? Particularly, I think there was an exacerbation of this after George Floyd and a lot of things. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, we have so many, for the first time ever, we got so many people of color that are burnt, and they're being more vocal. Now, this is me, Philip Wilkerson. I love that you said that. Philip Wilkerson have found a lot of power in hybrid. Sometimes it's exhausting to show up in a lot of spaces being the only. And sometimes it's like, it's kind of cool to just be in my own space. I don't have to show up. There was actually a study that said that the instances of microaggressions go down when you work remotely, right? You don't get a chance to get like offended as often, And so I found there is a power. Like, I never want to go back 100%, It was almost like I get my own space and energy. Maybe I get to regroup. Maybe, I get to connect with, as I said earlier, people of color like me offline a little bit better when I'm hybrid. So I don't know. For me individually, I kind of liked it. I like this hybrid model, and I'm going to look that up and dive in about what's called hybrid equity, because I know there was a lot of power and a lot of people got voices, especially a lot of people of color found their voices in a hybrid model, speaking up a little bit more, speaking up in the chat. But then there is going to be a point where it turns over a little bit, where because this is the wave, are they going to ask every person of color to chair a D&I committee? Like, do this because you're Black. I think you should be on this committee. And I was like, oh, it's more work. So I'm very interested to see that energy and how it's held up. So
yeah. I see that in recruiting as well. Like, oh, we're going to a campus. We want to get people, candidates of color. Phil, why don't you come, on the recruiting strip? And that's unpaid labor. So I think that idea of equity on the Zoom screen is really interesting, which is everybody's box is the same size, right, on a Zoom screen. And so sometimes you have more of an ability to speak up. What happens is some of those people are in person and some of those people on the screen. That's where I worry with the hybrid equity question is you might have the right to be on the screen and be paid the same amount of money, but will you have the same opportunities if you're not in person? And I don't know, I think we have to work really hard to make sure that happens and track it. And I think companies are really committed to, tracking the metrics on that. Does it hurt people to be home? Because my hope is that it just expands the pie. It's that if you're somebody who works better from home, or your personal situation demands it, or where you live, that should not hurt your opportunities. It should actually help them, because that's the right environment for you, and it'll help the company retain better talent, if they can work in different ways. So I think that's where we have to get really creative, but it's going to take a lot of time because we've never done it. And I think to assume that we're going to be perfect at it right at the beginning, I do also think we need to give ourselves grace that it's different. And I've been in meetings where I'm in the room and someone's on the screen and I forget that they're there. And so I have to be more mindful of that too. So it's really up to all of us to try to make that hybrid situation work.
And my mind was already thinking about tone and, you said accessibility, like making sure that the person at home that has to work from home can get, the same access to the resources, but also can see, or hear, just as much as a person in a physical space. So, because you've seen that already where like someone's at home and they can't hear or be engrossed as much as the in-person person in the space, or, maybe they have visual impairments and they can't see as much. So definitely the technology is going to have to find a way to be accessible and equitable as well. Because there is a power shift when you're at home and in person too, right? So it's crazy. Like it's so many things to think about. Well, I think my last question before I hit you is, now that you wrote this book, now that you're doing this, and we have all these differences and all this stuff, if you went to your crystal ball and you were like, okay, I'm going to look at 5 years in the future, what are just some normal standards? Because, like when I say normal standards in the crystal ball, I don't know who came up with this, but Monday through Friday, someone made this system Monday through Friday. I don't know where in the crystal ball someone made 40 hours was the wave. So what are some like big placeholder things you think are going to, and like I say, I put crystal ball, anecdotal, this is just your thoughts. What are some major things that you think will be just systemic in the future?
I think you were smart to bring up technology and how it drives things. Where the 40-hour, 5-day-week work week came from is from the automobile factories, right? When the automobile was invented and Henry Ford creates the assembly line, they have to have, these very specific hours in the trade unions and so on. So I think you trace it to the evolution of technology where we have to have a model for that. I think now that we're a more global society connected by technology, there are very few boundaries on that time. And so I think what it does is it expands the pie. A lot of people work many more than 40 hours a week and work all weekend, but a lot of people work less. And a lot of countries are experimenting with, the 30-hour work week and the 4-day work week and all that. So do I think 9 to 5, Monday to Friday is going away? No. But do I think that there are going to be a lot more models? Yes. And so where I would say the analogy is think of what we consider the quote nuclear family of, a mom, a dad, a boy, a girl, and a dog. Well, that was never everybody to begin with, but we had that as a model. And now we realize many Americans are single. Many Americans are same-sex couples. Many Americans are blended families, right? And that is more the norm. So my hope is that while a lot of people do still have the model of Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 as kind of the standard, just as we know with the American family, it doesn't look like Leave It to Beaver anymore, and nor does the work week. So I hope that companies and employers kind of jump on that and say, you know what, just as we know your family life can be diverse, so can your career life. And we might have people who work part-time. We have people who work gig. We have people who work on the weekends. We have people who work overnight, that becomes a little bit more common and commonly accepted. I think we're moving toward that since COVID. But I remember in my first job at Working Woman, there were 2 women who had a job share and they had the same title and the same job and they split it. And it was like radical. And I think stuff like that is going to be a little bit less radical and more accepted. And I think technology is going to kind of help us lead the way. So that's what I envision, is a bigger pie, a bigger belief in what's acceptable. It doesn't mean that the standard goes away. It just means that it's one of many choices, not the only choice.
Okay, that's great. Now I lied. That wasn't the last question. This is my portion of my show called Shot for Shot, where I get to ask you any random question. You ask me any random question. Which one? You want to go first? I'll go first.
I want to go first.
Okay, you go ahead.
Okay, you're like really buff and CrossFit-y. How do I get recommitted to exercise?
Okay, first of all, thank you. This is where the Zoom is up here. I have not lifted weights seriously in, I think, 3 years. So
I saw it on your LinkedIn, so I made an assumption. I should have checked my assumption.
Yeah, if you look at it, I used to be a coach for like 5 years, and then shout out to my son, and I used to be very actively involved in powerlifting. So I'm speaking, this is where I said this over and over again. I got my gym back and I'm going to start from ground zero where I had to find my motivation to lift again. Now, my motivation originally was I was never doing it for aesthetics. I never cared about having a six pack. No, I was a strength person that liked to be strong, and I also like to compete. So I was going to powerlifting meets. So my carrot was going to places where I'm on stage performing. Now that that's not my carrot anymore, I need to figure out what is my carrot. Honestly, it's still not having a six pack, but maybe it's just extending life or health or just getting a physical outlet. But I need to start day one. So I need to practice what I preach and say, my main thing, and I'm saying this out loud, is what is your carrot?
Find your carrot. I like that.
Carrot. And for other people, I mean, if it is vanity, like if you want to look good naked or in a swimming suit, use that. Get a picture of yourself before and after and use that. If mine was, I wanted to get trophies and hit records and have, like, I was literally putting, for my carrot, I was writing out the numbers I wanted to hit, and I was training and like going to competitions. So I need to figure out that carrot. Maybe it is also just like you go to the doctor's office, right? And you get the physical and they say your blood pressure is terrible and whatever. And you put on there, I want to lower my blood pressure. And when I go to the annual, when I go to my, do it again, the physical again, I want this number for my blood pressure to be lower. So you got to find your carrot.
Yeah, destination again. Okay, thank you.
So that's it. So my question for you, right, is that you experienced the country life, you experienced the city life. You said you're a city girl. City girl's up. That's like that summer, right? Why are you a city person? Please reiterate that again.
So I do want to say that I really believe in the and instead of the or. So I can be a city person and also enjoy the country on occasion. But I missed the vibe. And it's a hard thing to define. I miss being on the street. And yes, I miss my friends, but what I miss more was like the guy who runs my favorite coffee cart on the corner of 67th and Columbus, the random encounters that you get in a city, the energy, the diversity, the opportunity every day. Yesterday, my daughter and I just went downtown, right to the village, just because we could do that. And that was really fun. So I know it's not for everybody, but I really love that energy that when I walk outside, there's stuff to look at and stuff to do. And the country is beautiful and I still incorporate it into my life, but I do love the city.
All right, I'm gonna do one more. I lied. All right, so city, what is your top 2 cities in the United States to live and visit?
Well, that's all about people. I love New York. I've always loved New York. New York's my favorite, but my sister and my best friend live in Los Angeles. So I love the LA palm tree vibe. So I'm a bi-coastal girl.
Oh, wow. That's quite polarized. I'll tell you just real quick. My favorite cities in the United States is Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And New Orleans.
Okay. To see different vibe. Those are like party cities. I like the fact that in the city, in New York City, I can be as intense as I want to be. And there's always going to be people more intense. It can't be so intense in Austin and in New Orleans.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Thank you so much, Lindsey. So now is the part of the show called shout outs and plugs. So shout out means show love to whoever you want to show love to, their name drop, all that. And then plugs would be particularly how not only can the listeners connect with you and get engaged, but some of the things that you'd like them to be aware of to follow up with you.
Shout out to you, Phil, first and foremost, because you had me as a guest and you befriended me on LinkedIn. People say that you can't get to know each other online, but I think you can. And you're very authentic there. And you asked me to be on your show. And I love that. Second, my business coach, Dory Clark, who encourages me to try lots of stuff and always says, what are you going to do about that, Lindsey? You said it. What are you going to do? And keeps me accountable, which I really appreciate. Same, my friend Alana Eck is my meditation accountability partner. We meditate every day and send it to each other and get on each other when we don't do it. So that's really powerful. And of course, to my family for putting up with me and all these changes and decisions, especially my 10-year-old daughter, Chloe, who is my partner in crime and definitely calls me out whenever I get too big for my britches and think I'm too fancy. If a 10-year-old tells you that your outfit looks lame or you're putting on too much makeup or you're talking too loud, 10-year-olds will always will keep you honest. And I want to thank everyone for listening. I would love to connect, be in touch. I am very active, as you heard and can tell, on LinkedIn. I actually only use LinkedIn and Twitter for social media. So find me there, Lindsey Pollak. My latest book is Recalculating. I'd love to hear what you think. And my website is lindseypollak.com.
Excellent. And I definitely will put all that in the show notes for those to connect with you and engage. I'm definitely going to get the Audible of your book. I'm definitely an audio listener, so that's one of my next things on my Audible listening playlist. So definitely want to check that out. And I'll definitely follow up and say, wow, this is great. I'm glad I listened to this. Thank you so much, Positive Filter listeners. If you like this episode, please share it with a family member or friend. If you have a voicemail you want to leave for the podcast, call the number, which is 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Sometimes I incorporate those voicemails at the beginning of my episodes. Please like, subscribe, share, and support. Positivity is a movement, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity a Movement. Thanks for listening.